The worn linoleum of the daily grind diner had seen it all: spilled coffee, broken dreams, and the quiet desperation of 1,000 untold stories. For 23-year-old Amy, it was the stage for her relentless hand-to-mouth existence. One rainy Tuesday, a man named Edward Harlow walked in his suit, worth more than her entire life's earnings. She served him coffee. He was just another customer. But when she overheard a hushed, venomous conversation from a nearby booth, a plot to fleece the billionaire, she faced a choice: stay silent and safe, or risk everything for a stranger. Little did she know that single act of courage would unravel a reality more intricate and life-altering than any Hollywood script, changing her world forever. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind chimed, announcing another customer seeking refuge from the relentless drizzle that had plagued downtown New York for 3 days straight. It was a sound that usually brought a flicker of hope to Amy Jimenez. Another table, another tip, another small step away from the edge of the financial cliff she perpetually teetered on. But today, a gnawing exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, a weariness that no amount of caffeine could seem to penetrate. At 23, Amy felt closer to 40. Life hadn't just been hard. It had been a relentless series of sucker punches. Her mother's mounting medical bills were a constant, suffocating weight, the numbers on the overdue notices blurring into a single, terrifying monolith of debt. Her own dreams of becoming a graphic designer were locked away in a dusty portfolio under her bed, a painful reminder of a life she couldn't afford to live. Instead, her days were a blur of lukewarm coffee-sticky tabletops and the forced saccharine smile she had perfected for every customer, regardless of their demeanor. Her uniform, a faded pink dress with a small white apron, felt like a second skin, one she longed to shed. The diner itself was a relic of a bygone era, with its cracked red vinyl booths, a humming neon sign that flickered more than it shone, and the lingering scent of grease and stale coffee that clung to everything. It was a place for the forgotten, the hurried and the lonely. Today the loneliness seemed to be the special on the menu. A few solitary figures dotted the booths, a trucker nursing a mug of black coffee, a student with headphones on lost in a textbook, and a woman in a business suit furiously typing on her laptop. Amy moved between them with an practiced, almost robotic grace, her mind a whirlwind of calculations: how much she needed for her mother's prescription refill, whether she could afford to fix the rattling noise in her beat-up Honda Civic if the landlord, Mr. Henderson, would accept a partial rent payment again. It was in the midst of this mental ballet of anxiety that the bell chimed again. The man who entered was different. He didn't belong in the Daily Grind. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the diner's monthly revenue. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his face, though etched with the lines of age and experience, held a commanding presence. He carried a worn leather briefcase and an aura of quiet authority that made the very air in the diner seem to still. He chose a booth by the window, settling in with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Amy grabbed a menu and a glass of water, plastering on her customer service smile. "Welcome to the Daily Grind," she said, her voice a little brighter than she felt. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man looked up, and for a moment, Amy felt a jolt. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. They held a deep, melancholic wisdom, a hint of a past filled with both triumphs and regrets. "Just a black coffee, please," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. He glanced at the menu, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "And a slice of your apple pie. If it's half as good as the smell in here, I'm in for a treat." Amy nodded, scribbling on her notepad. "Best in the city," she said, the familiar line rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "Be right back with your coffee." As she turned away, she couldn't shake the feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. It was an unsettling sensation, one that both intrigued and unnerved her. She returned with a steaming mug of coffee and a generous slice of pie. The man who she now knew from the name engraved on his briefcase as Edward Harlow thanked her with a genuine warmth that was a stark contrast to the transactional nature of most of her interactions. As the afternoon wore on, the diner remained quiet. Mr. Harlow nursed his coffee, staring out at the rain-streaked street, lost in thought. Amy found her eyes drifting towards him more than once. There was a story there, she knew, a story far more complex than the simple narrative of a wealthy man stopping for a slice of pie. It was during one of these stolen glances that two men entered the diner. They were a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of Mr. Harlow. Dressed in flashy, ill-fitting suits, they exuded an air of cheap cologne and predatory confidence. They slid into the booth directly behind Mr. Harlow, their voices a low, conspiratorial murmur. Amy, busy wiping down the counter, tried to ignore them. But then a name spoken with a venomous hiss cut through the diner's quiet hum. Harlow. Her hand stilled. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She subtly moved closer, pretending to be engrossed in cleaning the coffee machine, her ears straining to catch their words. "He's a sitting duck," the first man, a burly figure with a thick neck and a gravelly voice, gloated. "Old man's been liquidating assets for months, moving everything into that new charitable foundation of his. A real bleeding heart. And a perfect target," the second man, thinner and more wheezily, added with a snide laugh. "He's emotionally vulnerable. His wife Eleanor passed away last year. He's been looking for a way to honor her memory. Our Eleanor Harlow Foundation for Aspiring Artists is just the ticket." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. The Eleanor Harlow Foundation for Aspiring Artists. It sounded so noble, so plausible. But the way they spoke, the predatory glint in their eyes, told a different story. This was a scam, a cruel and calculated one, designed to prey on a grieving man's love for his late wife. The men continued their hushed conversation, outlining their plan with a chilling precision. They had forged documents, created a convincing website, and even hired an actress to play the part of a struggling artist who had been saved by their non-existent foundation. They planned to approach Mr. Harlow with their proposal later that week, confident that his grief would blind him to their deception. Amy's mind raced. What should she do? Her first instinct was to say nothing. Getting involved was risky. These men looked dangerous. What if they saw her listening? What if they followed her home? She had her mother to think about. She couldn't afford to get into trouble. But then she glanced over at Mr. Harlow. He was still staring out the window, a look of profound sadness on his face. She thought of his late wife, Eleanor, and the cruel irony of her name being used in such a despicable way. She thought of her own mother and the desperation that came with being financially vulnerable. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. It was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to stand by and watch someone be taken advantage of. It was the same instinct that made her give her leftover tips to the homeless man who slept in the alley behind the diner, the same empathy that made her listen to the lonely ramblings of her elderly customers. She knew what she had to do. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she walked over to Mr. Harlow's table. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to clench them into fists to keep them steady. Mr. Harlow, she began, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, his blue eyes registering her fear. Is everything all right, my dear? She took a deep breath, her gaze flickering nervously towards the two men in the booth behind him. Sir, she said, her voice a little stronger now. I need to talk to you. Outside. Edward Harlow's brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and concern. He studied the young waitress, Amy noting the genuine fear etched on her face, the way her knuckles were white from clenching her fists. He had been a businessman for over 50 years, a predator in a world of sharks, and he knew a genuine damsel in distress when he saw one. He also knew a con artist. The lines were often blurred. Outside, he repeated, his voice calm and measured. Is there a problem? Amy's eyes darted nervously towards the two men in the booth behind him. Please, sir, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's important. I can't say it in here. Harlow's gaze followed hers, and he caught a fleeting glimpse of the two men who were now pointedly avoiding looking in their direction. A flicker of understanding, or perhaps just intrigue, crossed his face. He slowly rose from his seat, placing a $20 bill on the table for his $5 check. Lead the way, he said. Amy led him out of the diner, the cool, damp air, a welcome shock to her heated skin. The rain had subsided to a fine mist, and the city lights were beginning to blur in the twilight. They stood under the diner's flickering neon sign, The Daily Grind, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. All right, young lady, Harlow said, his tone a little more serious now. What's this all about? Amy took a deep, shaky breath, the words tumbling out of her in a frantic rush. Those men in the booth behind you, she began. I overheard them talking. They're planning to scam you, Mr. Harlow. They know about your wife, Eleanor. They're creating a fake foundation in her name. The Eleanor Harlow Foundation for Aspiring Artists. They have forged documents, a website. They're going to approach you this week. She relayed everything she had heard, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. As she spoke, she watched Harlow's face, searching for a reaction, but his expression remained unreadable, a mask of calm neutrality. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the air between them, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. Harlow was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked street. Amy's heart sank. Had she made a mistake? Did he think she was crazy? Or worse, part of the scam herself? Finally, he turned to her, his blue eyes piercing her with an intensity that made her squirm. And why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? She stammered. They're trying to cheat you, to use your wife's memory to steal from you. I understand that, he said, his gaze unwavering. But why do you care? It's none of your business. You could have just ignored it. It would have been the safer thing to do. Amy was taken aback by his directness. She thought about her mother, her debts, the precariousness of her own life. He was right. It would have been safer to stay silent. But as she looked at this man, a stranger who had shown her a small kindness, she knew she couldn't have lived with herself if she had. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. It wasn't right. What they were planning to do, it was cruel. And you looked so sad sitting in there all alone. I couldn't just let it happen. A flicker of something, surprise, admiration, crossed Harlow's face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. My personal cell number is on there, he said, handing it to her. I may need to speak with you again. Will you be working tomorrow? Amy nodded, still a little dazed. Yes, sir. My usual shift, 12 to 8. Good, he said. He then did something that surprised her even more. He reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, Amy, he said, his voice laced with a sincerity that sent a shiver down her spine. You've done a very brave thing. And with that he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded New York street, leaving Amy standing under the flickering neon sign, the business card clutched in her hand, her heart a tumultuous mix of fear and a strange, unfamiliar sense of hope. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. The two men left the diner shortly after Mr. Harlow casting her a suspicious glare as they walked out. Amy did her best to appear nonchalant, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Had they seen her talking to him? Did they know she had exposed their plan? That night, sleep offered her no respite. Her dreams were a chaotic montage of her mother's worried face, Mr. Henderson's angry voice demanding the rent, and the two men from the diner, their faces twisted in menacing sneers. She woke up in a cold sweat, the first rays of dawn painting her small apartment in a pale, ghostly light. Walking to the diner that morning, every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every passing car a potential danger. She half expected the two men to jump out from a dark alley to confront her, to hurt her. But the streets were empty, save for the usual morning commuters. The diner was a welcome if not entirely comforting sight. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon, the friendly banter of her co-worker, a gruff but kind-hearted cook named Sal, helped to soothe her frayed nerves. You look like you've seen a ghost, Sal remarked, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs onto the counter for her. Everything all right, kid? Amy forced a smile. Just a rough night, she said, picking at her eggs. She wanted to confide in Sal to tell him everything that had happened, but she couldn't risk putting him in danger too. This was her burden to bear alone. The day dragged on, each chime of the bell above the door, sending a jolt of anxiety through her. Every time a customer walked in, she braced herself, half expecting to see the two men from yesterday. But they never came. As the afternoon rush began to die down, a sleek black limousine pulled up in front of the diner. The sight of it was so out of place in their humble neighborhood that it drew stares from everyone inside. The back door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out. It wasn't Mr. Harlow. It was his driver. He entered the diner, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amy. He walked over to her, a small, polite smile on his face. Miss Amy Jimenez, he asked. Amy nodded, her heart pounding. Mr. Harlow would like to see you, the driver said. He's waiting for you in the car. A wave of nausea washed over Amy. This was it. Something had gone wrong. Maybe Mr. Harlow had confronted the men, and now they were coming after her. Or maybe he'd decided she was part of the scam after all, and was having her arrested. Her mind, a fertile ground for worst-case scenarios, conjured a dozen terrifying possibilities. Is everything okay? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The driver's polite smile didn't waver. Everything is perfectly fine, miss. Mr. Harlow simply wishes to express his gratitude in person. Gratitude. The word hung in the air, a stark contrast to the fear that was gripping her. Sal, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and concern, gave her a reassuring nod. Go on, kid, he said. I'll cover for you." With a deep, shaky breath, Amy untied her apron and followed the driver out of the diner. The limousine was even more opulent up close, its polished black exterior reflecting the grey New York sky. The driver held the door open for her, and she slid into the plush leather interior, feeling completely out of place in her faded pink uniform. Mr. Harlow was sitting opposite her, looking out the window. He turned as she entered, a warm smile gracing his lips. "Amy," he said, his voice a comforting rumble. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Harlow," she said, her voice still trembling slightly. I was so worried." He chuckled softly. "You have nothing to worry about, my dear. In fact, you have a great deal to be proud of." He reached for his leather briefcase, which was resting on the seat beside him. He opened it and took out a thick white envelope. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, handing it to her. Amy took the envelope, her fingers tracing the elegant embossed logo of a prestigious private bank. It felt heavy, substantial. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a check. The amount written on it made her gasp. Her vision swam, and for a moment she thought she was going to faint. The number had 6 figures. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, more than she could have ever dreamed of earning. I can't accept this," she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. It's too much." "Nonsense," Mr. Harlow said gently. "It's a small price to pay for what you did for me." "But I didn't do anything," she protested, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just told you what I heard." "You did more than that, Amy," he said, his voice growing serious. "You took a risk. You put yourself in potential danger to help a stranger. In my world, that kind of integrity is a rare and precious commodity. It's worth far more than what's written on that check." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking with hers. "I want to tell you a story, Amy. The men you overheard in the diner, they weren't just planning to scam me. They were a test." Amy stared at him, completely bewildered. "A test?" He nodded. "For the past few months, I've been searching for someone to run my new charitable foundation. Not the fake one those men were peddling, but the real Eleanor Harlow Foundation. It's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise dedicated to supporting underprivileged artists and musicians, a cause that was very dear to my late wife's heart." He paused, a shadow of grief crossing his face. "Eleanor was the most compassionate person I've ever known. She had an uncanny ability to see the good in people, to look past their flaws and see their true character. After she passed, I felt lost. I knew I wanted to honor her memory with this foundation, but I couldn't find anyone I trusted to lead it. I needed someone with not just business acumen, but with a deep, unwavering sense of empathy and integrity. Someone like Eleanor." He sighed, a sound filled with a weary sadness. "So my advisors and I devised a series of unconventional tests. We staged scenarios like the one you witnessed to see how people would react. We've been doing this for months in different cities, in different settings. We've encountered greed, apathy, and a whole lot of people who were more than happy to look the other way. You, Amy, you were the first person who passed the test." Amy was speechless. The events of the past 24 hours swirled in her mind, reforming into a new, unbelievable reality. The scam, the men her fear, it was all an elaborate charade. "But the men," she stammered, "they seemed so real." "They are actors," Mr. Harlow explained with a wry smile. "Very convincing ones, I might add. They'll be receiving a handsome bonus for their performance." Tears were now streaming freely down Amy's face, a mixture of relief, shock, and overwhelming gratitude. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." "Mr. Wong," Harlow said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached across the small space between them, and to her utter surprise, pulled her into a warm, fatherly hug. Amy, who hadn't been hugged like that since her own father passed away when she was a child, dissolved into sobs, clinging to him like a lifeline. She cried for her mother, for her lost dreams, for the crushing weight of her poverty. And for the first time in a very long time, she cried tears of hope. They sat there for a long moment, the billionaire and the waitress. Two strangers brought together by an act of kindness, their lives forever intertwined. When she finally pulled away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, Mr. Harlow was smiling at her, his eyes shining with a warmth that reached deep into her soul. "The check is just a thank you, Amy," he said, "a way to take care of your immediate needs, your mother's medical bills, your debts. Consider them taken care of. But I have another offer for you, a more permanent one." He leaned forward again, his expression earnest. "I want you to come and work for me, Amy. I want you to help me run the Eleanor Harlow Foundation. I can teach you the business side of things, but I can't teach you to have a good heart. You already have that. It's the most important qualification for the job." Amy's mind reeled. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams, a chance to not only escape her own circumstances, but to make a real difference in the world. But a sliver of doubt, a voice of insecurity, whispered in the back of her mind. "But I have no experience," she said. "I'm just a waitress." "You are not just anything, Amy," Mr. Harlow said firmly. "You are a woman of courage and compassion, and that is exactly what the world needs more of. What do you say?" Amy looked down at the check in her hand, then back up at the kind, expectant face of the man who was offering her a new life, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that she deserved it. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Mr. Harlow, I would be honored." A broad, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that seemed to erase years of grief and loneliness. "Please," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Call me Edward." The limousine ride back to the daily grind was a surreal experience for Amy. The world outside the tinted windows seemed both familiar and foreign. A city she had known her whole life, suddenly imbued with a new, vibrant energy. The weight of the check in her purse was a constant, tangible reminder of the incredible turn her life had just taken. But it was the offer of a new job, a new purpose that truly sent her mind reeling. She walked back into the diner in a daze, the bell above the door chiming her return to a life that already felt like a distant memory. Sal rushed over to her, his face a mask of concern. "Kid, are you okay?" What did he want? Amy, still struggling to process everything, could only offer a weak, watery smile. "Everything's fine, Sal," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Everything's more than fine." She couldn't bring herself to tell him the whole story. Not yet. It was too fantastic, too unbelievable. She needed time to let it all sink in. That night, for the first time in years, Amy slept soundly, her dreams filled not with anxiety and fear, but with a sense of boundless possibility. The next morning, she went to the bank, the check clutched in her hand like a winning lottery ticket. The teller's eyes widened in disbelief as she deposited the 6-figure sum into her meager account. Walking out of the bank, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since childhood. The crushing burden of her mother's medical debt lifted from her shoulders. Her first act as a woman of means was to pay off all of her mother's outstanding medical bills. The relief in her mother's voice when she told her the news was a reward far greater than any amount of money. Then she wrote a check to her landlord, Mr. Henderson, covering not just her back rent, but the next 6 months as well. The bewildered look on his face was a small, satisfying victory. A few days later, she met with Edward at the sleek, modern offices of the Harlow Foundation, located in a gleaming skyscraper overlooking Central Park. The contrast between this world of polished glass and steel and the greasy spoon diner she had just left was staggering. Edward, true to his word, began to mentor her, patiently explaining the intricacies of philanthropy, finance, and non-profit management. He introduced her to his team of advisors, a group of sharp, experienced professionals who, to her surprise, treated her with respect and kindness. They saw in her what Edward did, not a naive waitress, but a woman with a strong moral compass and a genuine desire to do good. As the weeks turned into months, Amy blossomed in her new role. She proved to be a quick learner, her natural empathy giving her a unique insight into the needs of the artists and musicians the foundation sought to support. She spent her days reviewing grant applications, visiting community art centers, and meeting with aspiring young talents whose passion and creativity inspired her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a real difference. But amidst the excitement of her new life, a question lingered in the back of her mind. Why her? She was grateful for the opportunity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Edward's story, a deeper reason for his extraordinary generosity. The answer came one rainy afternoon, much like the day they had first met. They were in Edward's office, a spacious, elegantly decorated room filled with art and books. Edward was unusually quiet that day, his gaze distant, his mood somber. "Are you all right, Edward?" Amy asked gently, her concern for him genuine. He sighed a heavy, weary sound. "Today is the anniversary of Eleanor's death," he said, his voice thick with a grief that was still raw. He walked over to his desk and picked up a silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of a beautiful woman with kind, smiling eyes and a warm, infectious laugh. Eleanor Harlow. "She was the love of my life," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My compass, my conscience. When she died, a part of me died with her." He looked at Amy, his blue eyes filled with a profound sadness. "You remind me of her, you know," he said softly. "Not just in your compassion, but in your spirit, your resilience, the way you see the good in people." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But there's something else, Amy. Something I haven't told you." He gestured for her to sit, then began to tell her a story that would unravel the last remaining threads of her old life and reveal a connection between them that was deeper and more shocking than she could have ever imagined. "Many years ago," he began, his voice low and hesitant, "before I made my fortune, I was a young, struggling artist myself. I lived in a small, run-down apartment in Brooklyn, barely making ends meet. I had a wife, a beautiful, vibrant woman named Sophia, and a baby daughter. We were poor, but we were happy." Amy listened, her heart pounding in her chest, a sense of premonition washing over her. "One day," Edward continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "I had a chance to go to Paris for a prestigious art competition. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to finally make a name for myself. But we couldn't afford the airfare. I was devastated." He looked away, his eyes filled with a shame that was still palpable after all these years. "I did something I'm not proud of, Amy. I borrowed money from a loan shark. A dangerous man named Ricardo Vargas. I promised to pay him back as soon as I sold my paintings in Paris, but I didn't win the competition. I came back with nothing. Vargas came for his money. I couldn't pay him. He threatened my family. I was terrified. In a moment of weakness, of cowardice, I ran. I packed a bag in the middle of the night and I left. I abandoned them, Amy. I abandoned my wife and my child. Tears were streaming down his face now. I always intended to go back. I told myself I would make my fortune, and then I would find them, I would make it up to them. But by the time I had the means to do so, they were gone. Sophia had taken our daughter and disappeared. I hired private investigators, spent millions trying to find them. But it was like they had vanished from the face of the earth. He looked at Amy, his eyes pleading for understanding. My wife's name, her maiden name, was Jimenez. Sophia Jimenez. Amy's world tilted on its axis. Jimenez. Her mother's maiden name. The pieces of the puzzle, the fragments of her own half-remembered childhood, began to click into place. Her mother, who had always been so secretive about her past, who had always told her that her father had died in an accident. The faded photograph she kept in a locked box, a picture of a young, handsome man with sad, haunted eyes. "My mother's name is Sophia," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Sophia Jimenez." Edward stared at her, his face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, incredible hope. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, tattered photograph, a picture of a young woman with a baby in her arms. The woman was a younger version of her mother, and the baby was her. In that moment, the truth in all its devastating and beautiful complexity fell into place. Edward Harlow, the billionaire, the philanthropist, her mentor, was her father. The man she had thought was dead. The man her mother had fled from all those years ago. The hug that followed was not one of gratitude or of mentorship. It was a hug of reunion, of forgiveness, of a love that had been lost and found again. They clung to each other, a father and daughter separated by time and tragedy, their tears mingling, washing away the pain of the past. The revelation that Edward Harlow was her father sent a seismic shockwave through Amy's life, rearranging the very foundations of her identity. The initial tearful reunion gave way to a period of quiet adjustment, a delicate dance of getting to know the man who was both a stranger and the missing piece of her life's puzzle. Edward, for his part, was overwhelmed with a mixture of joy and profound regret. He had spent decades haunted by the ghost of his past, by the family he had abandoned, to find his daughter, and to discover that she was the very woman whose integrity had so impressed him, felt like a miracle. A second chance he never believed he deserved. He arranged for a meeting with Sophia. It was a tense, emotionally charged reunion, held in the neutral territory of Amy's small apartment. Sophia, who had spent years building a new life for herself and her daughter, a life free from the fear and uncertainty of her past, was initially guarded, her eyes filled with the pain of a long-held betrayal. Edward, his voice thick with remorse, laid bare his soul, confessing his cowardice, his shame, and his unending love for her. He told her about his years of searching the countless dead ends, the gnawing emptiness that had followed him, even as he amassed his fortune. Slowly, tentatively, the walls around Sophia's heart began to crumble. She saw in his eyes not the reckless young man who had run away, but a man who had been broken by his own choices, a man who had paid a heavy price for his mistakes. Forgiveness did not come easily, But in the shared love for their daughter, they found a common ground, a starting point for healing the wounds of the past. As Amy and Edward began to build their newfound relationship, a new unforeseen conflict emerged. The news of their connection and of Amy's new role at the foundation did not go unnoticed. The world of high-stakes philanthropy was a competitive, often cutthroat one, and there were those who viewed Amy's sudden rise with suspicion and envy. The most vocal of these critics was a man named Julian Croft, a long-time board member of a rival foundation and a man who had once been a close friend and business associate of Edward's. Croft, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness, had always been jealous of Edward's success, and he saw Amy as an easy target, a way to discredit his old rival. He began to subtly poison the well-spreading rumors and innuendos through the city's elite social circles. He painted Amy as an opportunist, a gold digger who had concocted an elaborate story to insinuate herself into Edward's life and fortune. He questioned her qualifications, her background, her very integrity. The whispers grew louder, fueled by the city's insatiable appetite for gossip and scandal. Tabloid newspapers began to run stories with sensational headlines. Waitress claims billionaire is long-lost father. The Cinderella scam is Harlow's heiress a fraud. Amy, who had just begun to feel a sense of belonging in her new world, was devastated. The accusations were a cruel echo of her old insecurities, a reminder of the life of poverty and struggle she had just escaped. She tried to ignore the rumors, to focus on her work, but the constant scrutiny, the whispers and stares, began to take their toll. The conflict came to a head at the Foundation's annual fundraising gala, a lavish event attended by the city's most powerful and influential figures. It was supposed to be Amy's official debut, a night to celebrate her new role and the Foundation's work. Instead, it became a trial by fire. Croft, emboldened by the media attention, chose this public stage to launch his most direct attack. During the evening's speeches, he took the microphone and, under the guise of a friendly toast, delivered a thinly veiled diatribe against Edward and Amy. "It's truly a remarkable story," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A story of a long-lost daughter, a chance reunion, a rags-to-riches fairy tale. It's the kind of story that sells newspapers, the kind of story that, well, let's just say it's a story that requires a certain leap of faith." A hush fell over the room. All eyes were on Amy, who stood frozen on the dais, her face pale, her hands trembling. Edward, his face a mask of fury, made a move to intervene, but Amy put a hand on his arm, stopping him. In that moment, something inside her snapped. It was the same quiet rebellion that had made her warn a stranger in a diner, the same resilience that had helped her survive a lifetime of hardship. She would not be a victim. She would not let this man or anyone else define her. She walked to the podium, her steps steady, her gaze unwavering. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the skeptical eyes and the whispering lips. And then she began to speak, her voice clear and strong, filled with a conviction that silenced the room. "Mr. Croft is right," she began, her words ringing with an unexpected confidence. "It is a remarkable story. It's a story about a young woman who worked in a diner, who worried about paying her mother's medical bills, who dreamed of a life she never thought she could have. It's a story about a man who made a mistake, a man who spent a lifetime trying to atone for it. And it's a story about the power of forgiveness, of second chances, of the unbreakable bond between a father and a daughter." She paused, her eyes locking with Croft's. "You can question my qualifications. You can question my background. You can even question my story, but you cannot question my integrity, because my integrity is the one thing I have that was not given to me. It's the one thing I earned, and it is not for sale." She then did something that no one expected. She looked out at the audience, at the wealthy donors and the powerful philanthropists, and she spoke to them not as a billionaire's daughter, but as the waitress she once was. "I know what it's like to be invisible," she said, her voice filled with a raw, emotional honesty. "To be overlooked, to be judged, to be dismissed. There are millions of people out there just like I was, people with dreams and talents, and so much to offer the world, if only someone would give them a chance. That is what the Eleanor Harlow Foundation is about. It's about giving people a chance. It's about seeing the potential in a struggling artist, a young musician, a waitress in a diner." Her words hung in the air, a powerful testament to her journey, to her character. A spontaneous applause erupted in the room, a wave of support that drowned out the whispers and the doubts. Croft, his face flushed with humiliation, stood silently defeated. In that moment, Amy was no longer just Edward Harlow's daughter. She was her own woman, a leader, a force to be reckoned with. She had faced her own scam, her own test, and she had emerged victorious, her spirit not just intact, but stronger than ever before. The silence that followed Amy's speech at the gala was absolute. It was a dense, heavy quiet, a vacuum that had sucked all the air and whispers out of the grand ballroom. For a heart-stopping moment, Amy felt a surge of panic, a fear that she had misjudged everything, that her raw honesty had been a fatal error. Then from the back of the room, a single person began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound that was quickly joined by another and another, until the entire room erupted in a thunderous, sustained ovation. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar of approval, a wave of genuine emotion that washed over her, validating every word she had spoken. Julian Croft stood frozen amidst the applause, his face a mottled canvas of scarlet and white. The wave of support for Amy was a public repudiation of his attack, a social guillotine that severed him from the very world he so desperately sought to dominate. He turned his movements stiff and jerky, and all but fled the ballroom, a man undone not by a corporate takeover or a financial blow, but by the simple, unassailable truth spoken by a former waitress. The gala became the stuff of legend in the city's philanthropic circles. It marked a turning point, not just for Amy, but for the foundation itself. Her story, now framed by her own courage and eloquence, captured the public imagination. Donations which had been steady became a flood. Checks arrived with notes attached praising her integrity. Influential patrons who had once kept a wary distance now actively sought partnerships. Amy, who had so recently been a subject of gossip, was now hailed as a new, authentic voice in a world often criticized for its detachment. With the cloud of suspicion vanquished, the space it left was filled with the light of a new beginning. The relationship between Amy and Edward, now unburdened, settled into a comfortable, loving rhythm. Their days were a seamless blend of work and family, of board meetings and quiet dinners, of strategic planning, and the simple, joyful act of a father and daughter getting to know each other. The healing extended to Sophia. One Sunday, Edward invited both of them to his home for brunch. He was nervous, his movements tentative around the woman he had wronged so many years ago. He didn't come with grand apologies or expensive gifts, but with a small framed charcoal sketch of a cafe in Brooklyn, the very cafe where he and Sophia had their first date. It was a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, a humble offering of peace. As she watched Amy and Edward laugh over a shared memory, a genuine, unforced laugh that reached their eyes. Sophia felt the last tightly coiled knot of resentment in her heart finally begin to unwind. She saw not the ghost of the boy who had abandoned her, but a man who adored their daughter, a man whose regret was as profound as his love. That afternoon, as she accepted a cup of tea from his hand, a slow, true smile touched her lips. Forgiveness wasn't a single event, but a quiet, unfolding process, and it had finally found its season. It was Amy who first proposed the daily grind grant. In a board meeting surrounded by seasoned financial experts and veteran philanthropists, she laid out her vision. "We fund a lot of incredible talent," she said, her voice steady and sure. "But we're often looking at people who have already found a foothold, who have a portfolio, who know how to navigate this world. I want to find the ones who don't. The ones who are sketching on napkins during their lunch break, who are writing songs on the subway, who have the talent but not a single connection. The ones who are invisible." The program was approved unanimously. Amy poured her heart into it personally, reviewing applications and meeting with the finalists. During one interview, she sat across from a young man named Leo, a brilliant painter who worked 2 janitorial jobs to support his family. He was nervous, his hands stained with paint and grime, his portfolio filled with breathtaking canvases created in a cramped corner of his basement apartment. Amy saw her own past in his anxious eyes, the same desperation, the same burning, almost hopeless dream. "Leo," she said gently, pushing the formal application aside. "Your work is extraordinary, but tell me, what would this grant really mean for you?" He looked down at his hands. "It would mean I could quit one of my jobs," he whispered. "It would mean I could buy my daughter a proper bed. It would mean I could believe in this." He gestured to his portfolio, "just for a little while." "We believe in it," Amy said, her voice thick with emotion. "And we believe in you." A year to the day after their reunion, Edward's limousine pulled up in front of the Daily Grind. The neon sign still hummed, the scent of coffee and bacon still hung in the air. As Amy stepped inside, it felt like visiting a past life. Sal was wiping down the counter. He looked up, and a huge grin split his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he boomed, rounding the counter, to pull her into a fierce, fatherly hug. "Heard you're a real big shot now, kid. Don't forget us, little people." "Never, Sal." She laughed, her heart swelling with affection. "I'm still just Amy." They sat in the same booth by the window. The vinyl still cracked the tabletop, still bearing the faint, sticky rings of 1,000 coffee mugs. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled in the crisp air. It was a world away from the dreary rain of that first day. Amy looked around the diner at the tired trucker, the student with headphones, the hurried waitress who was a younger version of herself. A profound sense of gratitude washed over her. This place was not a memory of hardship, but the crucible that had forged her. "I owe this place everything," she said softly, turning to Edward. "I owe it you." Edward reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and firm, an anchor in the swirling currents of her life. "I'm the one who is in your debt. Amy," he said, his voice deep with an emotion that transcended gratitude. "You didn't just save me from a scam. You saved me from a life of lonely regret. You gave me back my past, and you gave me a future I never, ever believed I deserved." He gazed out the window, a gentle reflective smile on his face. "Eleanor would have loved you," he said, his voice a near whisper. "She always believed that the greatest art The greatest beauty comes from the most unexpected places. That compassion is the most valuable currency on earth. She was right. They sat in the quiet hum of the diner, a father and daughter, a billionaire and a former waitress. Their story, a quiet testament to the incredible, unpredictable nature of life. It was a drama filled with twists, but its final act was one of peace. It was a story of hope, of redemption, and of the enduring, world-changing power of a single, selfless act of kindness in a greasy spoon diner on a rainy afternoon. And so a simple act of warning in a humble diner didn't just save a billionaire from a scam. It rewrote the destinies of a father and a daughter, proving that the most profound connections can be found in the most unexpected places. Amy's story is a powerful reminder that integrity is a currency more valuable than any dollar amount, and that a single choice, a single moment of courage can set in motion a chain of events that leads to a life beyond your wildest dreams. It's a testament to the idea that everyone, no matter their circumstances, has the power to change the world, even if it's just the world of one other person. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will restore your faith in humanity. What would you have done in Amy's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.